Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 29th of November 2024. And my goodness, we have some interesting statistics to look at today. A massively record-breaking category number of 2,030 personnel lost. Previous high was sort of 1,780, I think, something like that. So 2030 smashes past that previous record considerably. I mean, that is a landmark sort of milestone. Incredible. So obviously some serious activity along the front lines yesterday. Possibly some troop accumulations hits. Not 100% sure. Maybe there's video evidence coming through of, we heard that claim that 500 people were killed in a Storm Shadow strike previously. Maybe that's been added to the list. I don't know. But for some reason, there is an incredibly high personnel loss number today, referring to yesterday. 8 tanks is pretty much on the daily average, which I think is fairly high contextually. Troop carrying AFVs is a considerable number today compared to yesterday. Very low numbers in both those categories. 33 is well above the daily average. 34 artillery systems, likewise. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. 86 vehicles and fuel tanks, very high in that category, and 3 pieces of special equipment. We also have high drones and cruise missile numbers as well, obviously referring to the attack 2 nights ago. So very, very heavy numbers for the Russians there, signifying some serious losses over the last 24 hours. Let's look at Andrew Perpetua's loss list for the day before. As you can see, we have about a 4-to-1 loss ratio, Russian to Ukrainian losses. Combat asset losses is about a 2-to-1, probably 2.5-to-1, maybe 3-to-1 losses there. A lot of civilian vehicles and trucks lost by the Russians. Let's look at the Ukrainian losses first, as we always do. An excavator, a couple of MT-12s, old anti-tank guns, a single tank T-64 lost. We have a captured Bradley. That's not going to be met with too much happiness from the Americans, I'm sure. Captured Bradley and an abandoned Bradley and an abandoned Marder. So those are almost certainly irretrievable losses. Abandoned, then hit by night vision drone. Abandoned, then hit by Vandal drone. On the APC front, we have a captured M113 and 2 other destroyed M113s. And then for the MRAPs, we have a captured Kirpi and a captured Kozak 7. So Turkish and a Ukrainian mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle. So that's 4 captured vehicles today. It's the highest I've seen, I think, ever. That signifies probably some maneuvers going on up in the Kursk area, most likely. But it could, who knows, could be other situations as well. And yeah, a few civilian vehicles there, not too many of them destroyed. A couple of trucks. When it comes to the Russian losses, really significant numbers there, particularly of civilian vehicles. So you can see loaves, pickup trucks, Bobiks, motorcycles, cars, lots of kit there lost. Then we have ATVs as well, your golf buggies and quads, and then quite a lot of trucks today on the list. Not too many of them destroyed though. Let's look at the combat asset losses though. A couple of air defense pieces, a Tor M1 and a Tor air defense system, both those damaged. One by Switchblade 600. We're starting to see a few bits of footage of the Switchblade being used. The other one just an FPV drone. Got a boat, a couple of bits of artillery, only 3 tanks on this particular list, and quite a lot of infantry fighting vehicles, BMP 1s, 2s and 3s, BTRs, usual culprits there. And most of that, majority of it just about destroyed and abandoned. And then we've got APCs, about 5 of those, 3 of them destroyed, MTLBs mainly. And then, as mentioned, trucks and civilian vehicles. So quite a lot of kit, just losing really big numbers of stuff. That's interesting. If we look at some personnel issues going on here, this is a view and an observation from Andrew Perpetua. And remember, I was thinking about this morning. I wonder whether Andrew or Gick, one of his team members, has seen, no one else on Earth maybe has seen as many videos or as many video clips as Andrew and or Gick. I wonder, who else looks at that many hundreds of videos every single day to the point where he's getting like minimal sleep. Like, I don't know that any other human being on Earth will be looking at as many videos of this war as these guys. And so when he casts his opinion, that is derived from an awful lot of visual evidence. So it's not just some people, a lot of Russian trolls will have a go at Andrew Perpetua, oh, who's he, etc., blah, 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 denigrating him for, you know, not being some formal analyst or whatever. I think he has surpassed any kind of formal analytical benchmark now. I mean, the guy has seen more stuff concerning this war than as I say, any other human on Earth, potentially. Anyway, his opinion here is you constantly see headlines like, quote, Ukraine holds back Russians with drones, infantry has it the worst. But those same publications never say anything like, Russian brigade has over 1,000 missing in action to advance 100 meters, presumed dead. Or Russian brigade suffers so many casualties they have pillaged every training center for men. Or Russian brigade suffers shortage of newly trained recruits, presumably because one brigade keeps getting wiped out and steals all the guys at the training center in order to continue suicide attacks. Tongue-in-cheek, but there's a lot of truth to this. I mean, there are some Russian units that are getting absolutely smashed. The 810th up in Kursk is not having a good time of it at the moment. And they are just cleaning out training centers. There are these videos we're seeing, anecdotes albeit, of people who have only been in the army for 3 days, right? They've been mobilized 3 days, 2 days of training, sent to frontline, captured. If that is a situation, they are cycling through people at a completely suboptimal level, whereby you're getting poorly trained, if they're trained at all, people poorly equipped, being sent into these meat assaults. And of course, that can work, right? You just need to overwhelm the opposition with more people with guns. But you are going to be losing an absolute ton of troops. And then you get, I wouldn't say an anecdote, a data point like this. Okay, Chris Owicki, one of his threads. So, the equivalent of an entire regiment, more than 1,000 soldiers, including 2 lieutenant colonels, have deserted from a single Russian division. The equivalent, singular, so has deserted, yep. Sorry, always questioning everything I read all the time. The huge numbers highlight the normally well-hidden scale of desertions from the Russian army. Important stories in reports that the division has sent other commands a list of 1,010 people with a request to help find them. They include 858 contract soldiers, 150 mobilized, and 2 conscripts, with 26 junior officers, 1 major, and 2 lieutenant colonels. The Volgograd-based 20th Guards Motor Rifle Division is said to have the reputation of being one of the worst in Russia's army. Its men were sent into Ukraine in February 2022 on a pretext of Ukrainian forces massing on the border, which it soon became clear was a lie. As the operation dragged on, 60 out of 80 men from a single company deserted from the 33rd Regiment. 15 soldiers from the 255th were killed in the first month, 91 were wounded, 151 deserted, according to an April 2022 report. On the 9th of July 2022, the entire command staff of the regiment died in a Ukrainian HIMARS strike on the airport at Chernobyivka. The division commander, Colonel Alexander Gorobets, his deputies, and the chief of staff and the head of the operations department were all killed. Chernobyivka was, if you remember, this revolving disaster of an airbase just to the sort of west of Kherson city that the Russians controlled, and they kept having helicopters there. It kept getting bombed, hit by, say, HIMARS, and then they'd restock it and be hit again, restock it, be hit again, and there was this meme of a revolving airbase that would like turn over, new stuff destroyed, turnover, and anyway, this is the unit that was around there. Gorobets's replacement soon gained a reputation for treating his men abusively and corruptly. Humanitarian supplies bought in civilians ended up being sold for profit. That's brought in by civilians. The new command staff was said to be uniformly stupid and incompetent military men. According to the division's soldiers, about 500 men had died by the summer of 2022. and there were also numerous deserters. The numbers grew further until the Russian Ministry of Defense banned resignations from the army and extended military contracts indefinitely. At least 96 of the deserters were caught and tried for leaving the unit without authorization by garrison courts. The number of cases across the Russian army has increased hugely and stood at nearly 1,000 per month by July 2024, equivalent to 40 cases per day. Most deserters are sent back to fight, many being assigned to assault units as punishment with a high probability of being killed. According to court records, deserters usually plead that they needed to return home to look after sick relatives or children. More senior deserters may simply be forgiven, quote, "You just returned to the unit and we'll pretend that you never disappeared." According to one man who fled the 20th Division, its deputy commander for technical matters went missing for 6 weeks. It turned out that he had several accomplices and had been stealing cars from local Ukrainians and taking them to Crimea to sell. The source says, quote, "The division commander simply scolded him and that was it." Soldiers often desert from hospitals where they are being treated for injuries after experiencing intense fighting. According to the group Go to the Forest, which helps deserters, there's been a surge in such cases since the spring of 2024. Men of the 255th Regiment have complained on multiple occasions about their abusive treatment by their commanders, including being sent on meat assaults without artillery support and being abandoned on the battlefield. The 20th Division is currently fighting in the Kharkiv area and of the Donetsk region, and its large number of deserters have undoubtedly caused some harm to its readiness. The military analyst Yan Matviv cautions against overestimating its effects. 1,000 people, especially if these are not simultaneous losses, do not look like a critical problem for Russian units. For comparison, the Russian army loses about 1,000 or even more soldiers at the front every day, killed and wounded. But nevertheless, it continues the offensive. This is a problem. The Russians are suffering huge numbers of desertions, it appears. It must also be said that the Ukrainians are supposedly having a tremendous issue with desertions too. So I don't think this only goes one way. But it's quite incredible to think that over the course of the war, an entire regiment's worth of troops has disappeared just from this one unit. So that's incredible. Right. Now, continuing this kind of theme, Russian recruit, the typical Russian recruit, has 1 month life expectancy after signing up for the war in Ukraine. Russian forces continue to advance despite losing up to 730,000 troops in the conflict, marked by extraordinary casualty rates, says the Euromaidan press. And obviously that's depending on Ukrainian figures. But yeah, life expectancy is not particularly something to shout about in the Russian forces. Now, today, a successful operation by Ukraine's GUI in occupied Crimea destroyed a Russian 48YA6 K1 Podlet K1 radar system valued at about $5 million. The mobile radar is used to detect low-altitude targets and guides S-300 and S-400 systems. So that's the Podlet. That has been taken out in Crimea, and that is very useful because not only is it expensive and difficult to replace, but actually is used by the S-300, S-400 systems, detecting air targets at low and extremely low altitudes. So good stuff there. There is also, actually we'll have that for later. There's also the destruction of a zoo park system as well. Quite a number of these has been taken out since the beginning of the war, and these are worth quite a lot of money. Destruction of the Russian counter-battery L219 zoo park with the help of 4 FPV drones there. Zoo park, I think is it 10 million zoo park? Cost. Sometimes it's approximately $24 million for the zoo park there. I've seen so many different claims for the zoo park going from like $100 million down to whatever. I think it probably depends what variation it is, but so 10 million there. It's so many different answers for this when you plug it into AI. But anyway, an expensive bit of kit, the zoo park. So not only the Podlet, but also the zoo park. We have a cancer worker in Free Kherson has been murdered by invaders this morning. Car she was bombed from a drone. Pure evil, just a civilian car. She was on her way to work in a Vostochny area with her husband when they were attacked. He survived with injuries. I mean, just this. So this is the work that Tochny do in counting up these horrific events. And I've had Brendan Kelly on here several times to talk about the work of mapping these, literally mapping them, and taking all the data in and analysing it, and actually doing some investigative journalism as well, where he's found out the exact units that have been carrying out these horrendous attacks on civilians. But that's just the latest example, and it's horrible, really. And Russia on fire here. So one more blaze, unlikely connected to the war, but a paint warehouse in Ufa quickly turned to flame red. So that is another big fire for the Russians. Okay, now we're going to go on to Syria. So the Syrian rebels have reached the suburbs of Aleppo, the second largest city in Syria. They are apparently moving fast because the Russian Air Force does not manage to coordinate with the ground forces. We've got the situation where the Russians are helping the Assad regime, but they are on the end of a bit of a hiding at the moment, and the rebel forces are moving closer and closer to Aleppo. Here is a video showing all of the armor that they have captured in this one single place they've got to. Rebels continue to advance on the third day of their offensive in Aleppo province, and you'll notice these all old Russian bits of kit, BMPs, and there's also a T-72. There's one there. But anyway, continue to advance on the third day of their offensive in the Aleppo province, capturing strategic Khan Tuman area south. Evidence accumulating that the regime has left an astounding number of pieces of armor, the biggest number since 2016. So multiple tanks there and multiple infantry fighting vehicles in Sheikh Ali. Then Anton Gerashenko says Syrian rebels for the first time in 5 years have launched a major attack in northwestern Syria on forces of the Assad regime, according to CNN, BBC and others. Opposition factions called the offensive deterrence of aggression, claiming it was a response to recent artillery shelling from the regime of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. This marks the biggest attack since March 2020, when Russia, which backs Assad, and Turkey, which supports the rebels, agreed to a ceasefire. According to the opposition statement, as of now, 56 villages in Aleppo and Idlib provinces have been seized, including the strategic towns of a number of these places, and a largest Syrian regime base in western Aleppo, base 46. Some of the clashes are happening less than 10 kilometers southwest of the outskirts of Aleppo. Meanwhile, Reuters report that Russian jets pounded newly captured areas and hit populated towns in the last opposition-held enclave. According to the two army sources, at least 16 civilians were killed in the rebel-held town of Atareb after Russia bombed a residential area. So we have this. This is Aleppo. We have this large area there is what the rebels are expanding in, taking places, going eastwards and getting dangerously close to Aleppo and coming down here as well. So you are seeing this kind of offensive happening around some of these areas of Syria, and that is affecting Russia. And Russia will have to make a decision as to whether they are going to continue to support Syria and pour in resources there, but those are resources I'm sure that would be very welcome on the Ukrainian front. Tendar says the list of Assad army losses reminds me of the Russian army losses in 2022 when Ukrainian forces conducted mopping up operations in the entire Ukraine's north from Russian presence, and in the process captured in a matter of days enough equipment equal to several months of fighting. So in the same way that we see like Andrew Perpetua and loss lists and whatnot, there are other people who do that concerning Syria, and you can see here that an awful lot of equipment has been captured by the rebels, and that this may well affect the Russians. In fact, Russian troops have reportedly began evacuating from Tal Rifat airbase north of Aleppo. This is one of the areas where Russia appears to be under the cosh a little bit, and their influence might be dissipating. Which is good news when you think of all these other places where Russia's influence is increasing, like Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, The US, although lots of interesting stuff to talk about the US at the moment, it is fascinating what's going on there. But you'll have to wait till the geopolitical video later. So Tim White talking about, and we're moving on obviously to distant strikes now. Tim White says it was another busy night for Ukraine's air defense with 132 attack drones being launched by Russia. No missiles as far as I can tell, so that's interesting. They say they've got enough in the tank for another couple of waves, the size of which we've seen, but they will be exhausting their stockpiles, of course. Anyway, of the 132, 88 were shot down, 41 was stopped, so that is 129. One returned to Russia, 130. That leaves 2 drones hitting their targets. Now, 2 out of 132 is incredibly good for Ukraine. Their air defense is doing such a good job. Now, we know electronic warfare is doing a brilliant job. Today, though, or last night, the conventional kind of shooting down of those drones was easily the most effective, over double the electronic warfare interceptions there. I woke up thinking about Skynex, because that's how cool I am, right? That's what I do. Wake up in the morning and think, oh, I wonder what Skynex look like shooting down these drones. And I wonder how many they've got now, because those German produced Orekleon, is that the correct name for it? Those turrets that are just firing huge amounts of lead into the air very quickly. Although that will mount up in expenditure, those rounds aren't cheap at like probably 500. I mean, the Gepard rounds are like $500 plus a pop. And if you're firing bursts of those into the air, I know they can fire like 1,000 in a minute. They're not going to be doing that all the time, but you're firing bursts into the air, and that's going to mount up in cost. Nonetheless, I wonder how effective they are. And I wonder about getting, Odessa's under the cosh so much at the moment, just getting a couple of Skynexes sat on the edge of Odessa and just, taking out whatever's in the air. And I wonder also whether they're effective. They've only got sort of 4-kilometer range and whatnot, but I wonder if they're effective at all against cruise missiles. But anyway, that's the kind of stuff I think about on a daily basis. Russia's drone attack damages children's medical center in Kiev. Injuries have been reported in one district of the capital. Debris from a drone caused a fire on a facade of a children's medical center. Security guard was injured in the attack. So that's the sort of thing that happens when you have these waves of drones hit Ukraine. It's not necessarily that they hit their target, but you blow them up in the air, and what goes up must come down. They fall down and cause issues on the ground. So 12 hits were recorded during today's Russian attack, mainly on fuel and energy sector facilities. That was yesterday's attack. But when we had that huge when the Ukrainians had that huge wave of missiles and drones, 90% of the caliber were shot down. Dense fog and cloudiness did not allow the pilots and the MVG mobile defense teams to effectively perform their tasks. I was thinking about this when I woke up as well, because I looked out the window when the curtains were opened. It's a beautiful morning here, and the skies are absolutely clear, not a cloud in the sky anywhere. And I was thinking, my goodness, we just had a couple of days that have been really, really cloudy and rainy and whatnot. And actually, the difference that makes. And then I just thought, drones. I can see a drone now from miles away. Yesterday, I wouldn't have been able to see a drone 50 meters away. And that made me realize again, not that I hadn't realized this before, but it's a real visual realization today that, my goodness, weather will make a huge difference to what goes on the front lines, because drones are often maneuvers are contingent upon drones, where you're doing your reconnaissance. So you say, right, we can move there. There are no Russian troops there, or there are Russian troops there, so we need to attack over here. Drones are the eyes in the sky, but also drones are what is taking out the majority of the Russian attacks, so on and so forth. And with regard to air defense, just visually being able to see a Shahed flying through the sky, it means that you're going to be able to hit that with something like a Gepard or an anti-aircraft gun like the one you can see in the picture there. Clouds are unfortunately going to stop that from the air defense from being effective. So, weather really does play an important part. Okay, Russia retains enough missiles, as I mentioned earlier, for 2 to 3 more large-scale attacks, similar to the one from the 28th, said Dmytro Khmylo, the Ukrainian security expert. However, Moscow lacks the capability to plunge Ukraine into total darkness, he believes. So although they can really hammer Ukraine, they've only got enough missiles at the moment for 2 or 3 more such strikes, but they won't bring Ukraine to its energy knees. Putin threatens, though, to strike decision-making centres in Kyiv with high-precision Russian weapon. He's been talking a lot at the CSTO in Kazakhstan about how wonderful Russian missiles are and how deployable, how many he's got that are deployable, and he's actually threatened to hit decision-making centres. Now, this would be, you would assume, a threat on like the Verkhovna Rada. I've been interested in why such places haven't been struck before. You know, where they know where Zelensky hangs out, right? In usually, I would think the main kind of government buildings, at least in Kyiv. Why have they not targeted them? Is that because the PR for that will be too bad for the Russians? A bit like hitting Red Square, and that would be deemed as being highly controversial. Is it because that the Ukrainians have protected those places with the most air defences, and actually Russia might have tried, but they can't get through? I don't know. But now he's making overt threats on these decision-making centres in Kyiv. And I presume that's political decision-making centres and not military decision-making centres, or it could be both. Putin claims Russia has developed a missile system with destructive power near equivalent to nuclear weapons and selecting targets in Ukraine. So this is an interesting bit of psychological play from Putin here, which is like, okay, so we're not allowed to use nuclear missiles, and that'll probably be counterproductive. But if we just use just a really big bomb that doesn't involve nuclear, how about that? Do you reckon the world will go so mental? No? Okay, well we're going to threaten you with that instead. And we will use that because, hey, it's not nuclear, and that's the thing that most people get annoyed about. Interesting. Right, on the other hand, Ukraine last night had some really good success with hitting Russian hydrocarbon entities again. Something was burning hard in the area of the Atlas oil depot near Kamensk. Could it have come again? Well, this was hit previously. When was it hit, Kamensk? Was it July this year? September? I think July. So was this the one that had an awful lot of the tanks burning for an awful long time? Well, anyway, it's been hit again. More from the Atlas oil depot in Kamensk in Rostov region. The drone is thought to have been hit by the site is thought to have been hit by Ukraine's drones last night, and actually there was some pretty significant footage of this on fire. Ukraine may have hit another oil depot in Russia. The plant is Kamensky district in Rostov that was attacked exactly 3 months ago today. Interesting. Tonight's fire has engulfed fuel tanks already. Some locals say they heard drones, but it's not 100% confirmed. Second video from the fire raging at Kamensky oil depot in the Rostov region of Russia. So really significant fire there. Official statements have now arrived. They report that Ukrainian forces are carrying out widespread attacks in the Rostov region. According to War Translated, so far 30 drones have been destroyed and disrupted by electronic warfare systems. That's what the Russians were claiming. It appears the oil refinery effectively fulfilled its role as air defense. So, as ever, the Russians say, well, we shot everything down. We've taken, air defense has taken down the drones. It's like, by air defense, do you mean an oil refinery, an oil depot? An oil depot has taken down those drones by sitting there and waiting for the drone to hit it. Ukrainian General Staff confirmed the strike on the Atlas oil depot in Rostov. According to them, the attack caused a fire with at least 2 areas of ignition. Additionally, Ukrainian forces destroyed a radar station, interesting, for the book M3 in occupied Zaporizhia. I wonder if that's the zoo park mentioned earlier, or whether that's another radar station. Now, the Atlas oil depot is still burning today. As a result of the Ukrainian drone strikes on the oil depot near Kamensk-Shaktinsky in Russia, 3 oil tanks are on fire as of this morning. It'd be interesting to see how long that goes, because was that not the one that burnt for days and days and days previously? And may well be that they've taken out the ones that weren't previously burning. Last night, Ukrainian drones targeted military sites in Tuapse in Krasnodar Krai after the attack smoke was visible. So Tuapse is a place where another oil depot, or is it refinery, is. And that is, or both. That has been hit, I think, a number of times previously. But the claim here is it's not the hydrocarbons infrastructure, but military sites instead. So interesting. So I guess more information will emerge throughout the day. And then just this morning, we hear that smoke and traces in Vitino are apparent. This is a screen grab. There's actually a video of this. So something's been hit in Crimea, occupied Crimea. Unclear what is going on, says no report. So it could be some further good news for Ukraine there. Okay, and moving on to other bits and pieces, quite a few varying things to talk about. So the dragging anchor cut the first cable between Sweden and Lithuania shortly afterward, according to two people familiar. During that time, the ship's transponder, which charts its movements on the so-called automatic identification system, shut down. So this is the Wall Street Journal reporting the Yipeng 3, that Chinese ship with a Russian captain that has been seen as probably responsible for cutting two undersea cables. Now, it seems insanely improbable that that ship would accidentally cut a cable whilst at the same time just turning off its transponder. The problem is you have plausible deniability here, and this is the classic. It's like it's conceivable that this is what happened, that they accidentally dragged an anchor across there, and you can't prove beyond reasonable doubt that it was done intentionally. It's very, or at least it's very difficult. It becomes a probability. I mean, all propositions are probability assessments anyway. And I don't want to get into the epistemology, the study of knowledge and truth here, and what my theories of knowledge and truth are. But by the way, you can read that in one of my books. Just go and check all the books I've written on Amazon or elsewhere, any other bookseller. Jonathan M.S. Pearce. All my fiction is under Johnny Pearce. My non-fiction, that's a book, the one with the wall on the front, building up my how to do knowledge, meaning, and morality in a godless world. That I set out how I understand knowledge and how we go about making assessments of what is true and what is not. Anyway, without being too boring, with this case, it's all going to be kind of circumstantial evidence. It's going to be very hard to find definite proof that this was done intentionally, and that's what Russia gets away with. So you say, well, I reckon it's, personally, my intuition says it's almost certainly Russia, but do we have enough actual hard evidence to prove that is a case? What is the probability that this was Russia? And then how much definite evidence do we have to back that up? Is that probability derived from form and from who the sort of, is this the sort of thing that Russia would do, blah, 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 rather than actually having, an intercept that is telling them the order to do that. And actually, Shashank Joshi from The Economist kind of discusses this with regard to the Wall Street Journal. Looks pretty clear that cable cutting was intentional. Quote, investigators say that around 3 a.m. the following day, having travelled about 111 miles, the Yipeng 3 cut the second cable between Germany and Finland. Shortly afterward, the ship started zigzagging, raised the anchor, and continued. Several Western law enforcement and intelligence officials said they didn't think the Chinese government was involved in the incident, interesting, but they suspected Russian intelligence agencies were behind the sabotage. Now, Shashank Joshi continues, suspected is the right word. I haven't seen any sign that officials have a clear attribution at the moment, but these things are very hard to attribute or attribute without wider intelligence. In other words, without having an intercept or something saying, yeah, have you done that yet? The cutting of the cable. Have you cut that cable with the anchor? Like we asked you to run over that cable with the anchor from the Yipeng 3. Ivan. Without that intercept, you're just piecing together what's probably the case, but then that allows Russia an awful lot of wriggle room if Russia's your suspect here, and it's not enough to then say, well, this is an act of war, and that's what Russia gets away with, and it's deeply, deeply frustrating. if they can show the anchor was down, that's enough to show gross negligence and bad seamanship. No need to prove any motive. Pull the licenses to the crew and every ship certifications, etc. Maybe liability for the damages too. That should be done absolutely regardless, says this other person. Paying is important and that might be the only way, but that isn't sufficient for attribution to either potentially that isn't sufficient for attribution of culpability for the responsible country or its leaders, and that matters. And that's the point, is that Russia gets away with this because you're like, I'm certain it's Russia. Like, I'm certain, I would bet my mortgage in reality it's Russia, but can I prove that in a court of law? No, I can't. And there's sufficient amount of doubt there, technically. There's no doubt in my mind, right? But in a kind of legal sense, there is enough doubt there to get Russia off the hook, and that's all they need. And so they can continue doing stuff like this and getting away with it as long as there's no paper trail that leads to Russia. It's really, really frustrating. So the intelligence chief, Ruble Budanov, has dismissed rumours of his dismissal as destabilisation attempts. Reports this week, and I reported them, suggested that the president's office may replace him, but Budanov called it misinformation aimed at sowing discord. That wouldn't surprise me either, to be perfectly fair. Now, Zelensky has passed the state budget for 2025 with an eye-watering 62% allocated for defence. So Ukraine is on a war footing, of course, and its budget is being thrown at the war because they have to, because if they don't, they will cease to exist. Total expenditure is 3.6 trillion hryvnia. Defense gets 2.23 trillion. Social protection 0.42. Health 0.22. Education 0.2. Wow. So that's an insane amount of money, or at least the same proportion of the budget that they are spending on the war. Now, Russians execute 4 more Ukrainian prisoners of war near Pokrovsk. We are seeing this every single day at the moment, and yet the mainstream media just doesn't bother reporting this anymore. 2 days before this war crime, the Russian military killed 2 other Ukrainian POWs in the same area, per the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office. Chris Owicki, another thread from him. Russian soldiers who use their own or donated vehicles on the front lines now face being executed along with their commanders, according to Russian mill bloggers, in a sharp escalation of the Russian army's counterproductive campaign against personally owned vehicles. This is one of these weird situations where you're like, really? Huge losses of military vehicles have left Russian logistics at the front line and even battlefield transportation reliant on civilian vehicles. This is something we have noticed in our surveying of the statistics and then looking at video evidence ourselves. However, the Russian army has been cracking down on their use despite the harm to its own logistics. According to the Russian mill blogger Anastasia Kashavarova, the southern military district's new commanders issued orders via audio messages, but not in writing, stating that troops using a personal vehicle will now be sent to their death along with their local commander. Quote, from November the 27th, any humanitarian vehicle without registration will be stopped and confiscated. The driver and the driver's commander who violated the order will go on assault. The blame is to be placed on the deputy for the armament of the regiment. Issuing a combat order for personal transport will also be punishable, starting from the fighter and ending with the commander of the military unit. End quote. The Mine Division Telegram channel reports, quote, regarding the confiscation of vehicles, the units are really in a mess. This is in the Donetsk direction, and many are afraid to talk about it openly because they will immediately be reset, which means executed. Another soldier writes on a pro-Wagner group channel, reverse side of the medal, they are simply shooting at our legs from behind. Work is stopped. Everyone is in shock, and the district headquarters issued an order clearly without thinking it through. All our supplies and work of assault groups are connected with humanitarian transport. Loaves, bukankas, motorcycles, those are Scooby-Doo vans, motorcycles, quads. I hope that the officials above the divisional officers will see and understand all this must be fixed. End quote. According to the On the Move channel, 70 to 80% of Russian frontline vehicles are privately owned. Wow. And this is fascinating, this thread, just from these little nuggets. The channel's author writes, quote, let's start with the simplest example in the form of a unit in which I am currently located and perform tasks. Absolutely all the vehicles in our glorious company are personal. which we took at our own expense and in some cases thanks to sponsorship, literally collecting from around the world. Of course, the transport is also refueled and repaired at our own expense. We do not have any compensation for expenses or anything else, and who will give it? The above mentioned transport travels both in the rear and in the line of contact. Accordingly, it also has to organise the delivery of fighters to the front and the removal of fighters from the front. In the rear zone, we also go for equipment, fuel, food, etc. End quote. Kasharvarova fumes that the order also ignores the position of the Radut mercenary group or Chechnya's Akhmat, both of which exclusively use privately owned vehicles. She queries whether it is some kind of Ukrainian information warfare to demoralize Russian troops. If not, she warns, quote, then this is what awaits us. One, clashes at posts between the military and other services, military automobile inspectorate, the military police, which are ordered to confiscate transport. 2, bleeding of the front, since mobile vehicles are mainly humanitarian transport and personal cars. 3, refusal of humanitarian workers to bring transport to the front, since it will go to the accounts of the Ministry of Defence. 4, confiscation of personal cars and all humanitarian aid for their own use by unscrupulous command, trade and enrichment of such commanders. 5, sending unwanted people to zeroing and appropriation of their cars. In other words, sending people on meat assaults and nicking their cars. War correspondent Alexander Sladkov reports that donated vehicles are already being resold by unscrupulous commanders, sometimes often without even bothering to remove the installed electronic warfare systems. They were given to the unit. Many soldiers register them in their own names and then consider themselves its owner. Sometimes they sell them. And when they buy vehicles for a motorcade, we see dozens of ads. We come to look, and they were too lazy to even remove the electronic warfare. That is, it is clear the military often register the vehicles donated by humanitarian workers in their own names and then sell them without even bothering to deregister them, just like the vehicles themselves bought with public money, and I personally know such cases. In other words, as far as I understand this, they get donated vehicles by civilians, either with or without electronic warfare on, and then they put electronic warfare on if it isn't there, and then that gets confiscated and then sold back to them by the officers that are confiscating the vehicles, or maybe sold to another unit. It's just nuts. So on and so forth. It's a much longer thread. I won't go on just for the need for expediency. Okay. Commander of the Russian 13th Tank Regiment was found to have over 40 million in his bank account due to extorting people to pay not to be sent to the front for meat assaults. Even the Russians are shocked a little, says David D. So the commander of the 13th Tank Regiment, 40 million in his account. And, you know, we go back to the Chris Wiki thread of commanders forcing privately procured vehicles to be given up and then selling them themselves. We've heard of commanders selling scrap metal to. Interestingly, that was the guy. Oh, what was his name? He's actually the commander that they really like, his troops. He was selling scrap metal, then got done. He's one of the ones that's been arrested, but actually he's a really good commander. But he was selling scrap metal for his own units so that he could actually get them stuff. So it wasn't for his own self-enrichment. Anyway, more woe for Russia's aviation industry, says Tim White. Another of its homemade superjets has been stranded at Saransk airport for several hours due to engine failure. The Azimuth flight is supposed to be going to St. Petersburg. It's caused the manufacturer and Rosaviatsia to issue statements saying the plane is fine. These incidences are happening continuously. Right, just a little Russian financial news. This is Dawn Fox with a comment. So, you know, take it with a pinch of salt. It is just someone commenting, but interesting points here. Russian, not just someone commenting. I love all your comments, but, you know, the provenance of these claims is, you know, we could question. I'm not. The Ruble crash yesterday was caused by the US applying new sanctions to Russian Gazprom Bank. So the Bank of Russia responded to the dramatic fall by declaring it will not buy any foreign currency until the end of the year 2024. This is basically a withdrawal of financial trading in the ruble. This doesn't, however, change anything further happening in the real world. It just prevents anyone from actually seeing what is happening in the ongoing fall of the ruble. It's like turning off the screen, but the problem doesn't go away. In other words, we might not know what the value of the ruble is officially, but it won't stop the ruble tanking further in real terms. Like the reality is that the ruble will be being used in a way that will indicate it's got falling value. The ruble price will now appear fairly stable around 110 rubles to the dollar until trading resumes, but it'll probably restart with a big crater because the same problems will be ongoing and the Russian economy situation will still keep getting worse. In the meantime, prices will continue rising as a result of the decision by the Bank of Russia, and it will dramatically accelerate domestic inflation because everything that Russia wants to buy from other countries will cost them in black market deal rates. It's going to be a real hard winter for the Russian public. They'll be bearing the brunt of this as foodstuff prices are going to be on the front line. Interesting comment there. Thank you so much, Dawn, for that. Now, I'm going to end with good news for those who like wine and supporting Ukraine. Last night on the community tab, I posted this picture. I went to my local Lidl. So for most people in Europe will know Lidl. In America, this is like a supermarket chain, German-owned supermarket chain that is pretty reasonable. It operates without many staff, and it's just, Lidl is Lidl. But it's been stocking Ukrainian red and white wine. So I went there last night. Someone sent me a photo, and I was like, right, I'm going to do that. And this is my experience. They only had the white in my local Lidl, so I was gutted. I was half happy to find the Ukrainian white in my local Lidl, but unfortunately couldn't find the red. What's going on? This is what happens when I write on my phone with swipe text. I was half happy to find a Ukrainian white in my local Lidl, but unfortunately could not find any. Good. I'm live editing with you guys. I feel I'm helping Ukraine in a way that suits me just fine, right up my street. So there you go. White Ukrainian wine there. Couldn't find any red, but I love this. So Jumpy Spider, enjoying a glass of Ukrainian wine, thanks to ATP Geo for the heads up. So go to your local Lidl, get yourself some Ukrainian wine, and it supports Ukraine, but also communicates to Lidl that actually buying in Ukrainian stuff might be a nice little thing that might get people who are obsessed with Ukraine into Lidl and buying stuff. So it might be quite a good thing. So we can support Ukraine in a couple of ways there, and drink some wine. So, what's not to like? Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care, guys. Speak soon.